Hello, it's me. It is Matt, and I'm going to talk about a video game, as you could probably tell from the title. So, what video game am I talking about? Well, if you didn't read the title, then you won't know. Then why'd you click on the thing if you didn't read the title? I don't know. Who am I? What am I doing? I don't know. Anyway, let's talk about Fear 2, and how I think I have ruined it for myself. Starting with, what is Fear? Fear is a franchise built, it is built by a team called Monolith Studios? I'm terrible. I forgot to actually bring this window back up. We are on Monolith Productions and published by Vivendi, Universal Games, and Warner Brothers Games. It was released. The first one was released on October 17, 2005, and for Microsoft Windows, and ported by Day One Studios to the Xbox 360 and PS3. And this is just from Wikipedia, just to give you a quick rundown on what the game is. Now, the first game was fantastic. I absolutely loved it and actually played it through this channel, which I'll leave in a link down in the description and on the card at the end of the video. So, what do you want to know? I think the first game is far superior than the second for several reasons. The art style, the sound, and the general atmosphere. All completely different. While the game is set in the same franchise, I do believe that the game from number 1 to number 2 has declined. This is not including the DLC, of which I have not played, but I do own, and I may do a live stream for those if people ask for it. If you wish for me to review or talk about any other games, you also could ask for them in the comments down below. I am always ready to talk about games if people want me to. And if you want me to find things that you like and ruin them for you, I will also do that too, but that's up to you. If you want to suffer, that's all on your part. So let's begin. Let's start with the art style. Okay, so starting with the art style, we're going to start from talking from Fear 1, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Fear 2 and how much the differences I see in the game. For one thing, Fear 1 has been out in 2005 and Fear 2 is 2009, so I will note that there are graphical differences in quality and quantity. And that is actually included in my opinion, but I am not holding that to account the fact that I feel that the actual design has devolved from the first one to the second one. Starting with the first one, I have found that the first game was while it had a very basic and although complicated style, it used a lot of blues and greys and a couple of browns. It was around the start of the brown era in modern shooters, while sticking with a nice contrasting red. The red was never overdone. It was always very stark. You can tell the red from the different surfaces. From all the different reds, the reds were always individual in the sense, including the blood and Alma's dress. Alma being the antagonist / story pusher in this game. Furthermore, that the first one had quite a good use of lighting, as it was never too dark but never too bright. The shadows were extreme in some cases, which is something that you actually want in horror games on occasion. Because if everything's the same dull grey, it really takes away from the visual aspect of it, and then it kind of diminishes everything else that the game puts into it. While I say that, there is the downside of that it being graphically inferior-ish to the second one. I am not allowing that to muddy the waters in this case, because that would be cheating, as there is a 4-year difference, and as we know, in the gaming industry, 4 years can make a massive difference between each and every game in the series or other games. So in this case, the art style, I believe in Fear 1 was a lot better due to the fact that it's kept the semi-realistic tone, but with very big contrasts on certain aspects, including the use of reds and the use of shadows. There was always a dark and there was always a light, but the in-between was kept to a minimum, if that makes sense. When it comes to lighting up the areas where it wasn't meant to be scary, it was used well. It kept it in the... how to put it? It kept it realistic without it being overly done. There were still stark contrasts in the area, in in the outskirts. Like, there was always an uncertainty of the area. Even if you're in the middle of a massive gunfight, shooting through slow motion bullets and taking out every clone soldier you find. That is the minimum I ask for in games when it comes to horror and atmosphere. Is atmosphere. If your horror game has no atmosphere, you haven't got a horror game, you've got a jump scare simulator. Five Nights at Freddy's, in this case, is an excellent use of atmosphere and light. It takes the uncanny valley in the animatronics because it doesn't look stupidly polished, but it doesn't look amateur. And the fact that it's a darkened room, but you've got a beautiful contrast of light in where you are, and everything else is in the shadows, makes you feel very abandoned in this room where you don't know where the walls end and where you start. So you never know, and being that you're stuck in a chair doesn't really help. Now to move on to Fear 2. Fear 2 is where everything goes wrong. Now, the art style of Fear 2, while retaining a similar-ish style to the first one, there was a little bit more realism, mainly due to the fact that it has improved in the graphics. The graphics have improved over 4 years, and it's obvious that due to the fact that games improve rapidly when it comes to like visual aspects of it. But the game itself also suffers from what's known as the gaming brown period in first-person shooters, where everything's just brown. There's a whole lot of brown. Even the reds struggle to fight against the browns in a lot of the cases. And when they do, the only time you really see as much red is when Alma is in a small child form, or when you go into the slow-mo, and that's when some of the contrasting colours show up a bit more, but even then, that doesn't excuse the fact that you cannot see as much difference in colour when you're playing the game. I mean, I'm looking at screenshots now, and I'm looking at the gameplay itself, and a lot of the colour is so similar. The lighting itself as well. The lighting, again, suffers from a bit of a samey period. It's like nothing has a true shadow, and when there is a shadow, it's either blocked out by another light that's meant to not. If you took out half of the lights in the game, it would probably be a lot scarier. I turned down the brightness and I messed with the graphics to see if I could get any better. No, nothing really fixed that. I mean, I'm going to take Half-Life 2 in this case. Half-Life 2, while that came out earlier, if I remember correctly, its lighting in certain areas is a whole lot more atmospheric than Fear 2, and we're talking a few years here. Now, it may be that the engine itself struggles with lighting. It's using the same engine, an upgraded version, I would hope, and the game just looks like any other modern shooter. I'm not gonna lie, it looks like a slightly darker modern shooter. I mean, it is a modern shooter, but it's meant to be a horror shooter. And I can understand why they need a bit of light, but in a lot of the cases, the light's being used where we should be less light. And more light's being used. There's too much light in other places. And also, I don't understand the strange cinematic. There's the word I was waiting for to come up. Cinematic. The game is cinematic. That's the problem when a production company such as Warner Brothers gets involved with a video game. They want the word cinematic. So they can sell it as a cinematic masterpiece, a cinematic game. Something that you can watch, not play. And this is an issue that I found with a lot of games that have popped up. If they have the word cinematic in there, you're not going to have a full game, in my opinion. That's what's happened. But I've kind of went off on the down. I've went off there. So back to the words, the camera. During some of the cutscenes, for some reason, instead of having things come to you, you always came to the thing. the camera, while obviously it takes over and you've got no control, those are the times where you're meant to feel scared, and also the times where it's silent, but we're not going into that until the sound section, and I've got to get through this and gameplay. I forgot to mention gameplay earlier. I will be talking about the gameplay. So when you are doing a cutscene, it will take away your control, obviously, and for some reason have this weird shaky eye cam, especially when there is an Alma or a paranormal section, and it will zoom in unnaturally on things. Like, while it is important, it takes away from what it's meant to be giving you, like this sense of, oh my god, what's happening? And the sound plays a lot into this too. What could be better is if you didn't zoom in, used a little bit less shake, and focused on the sound and the lighting. Because a lot of the lighting, it immediately just increases the orange tinged brown, and then darkens it to a point that you almost can't see it. And it's almost pointless. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about. I mean, you can disagree with me down in the comments below. I'll happy discuss it with you. Games are my thing, and I love talking about them. So let's move on to the next bit. Gameplay. Hey, well, before I get to the gameplay, I'm going to discuss one little tiny thing, which is scare triggers or event triggers. We'll call them event triggers because they're not always scares. So an event trigger is something that if you enter a certain area or you look a certain direction in a certain spot, something will happen. And in the case of older games where they had smaller resolutions and so smaller fields of view, often enough you would always, and they were designed so you would see them when you looked or walked into a certain place. The problem is that I've noticed that with the newer resolutions being much higher than the previous ones, there are things that I'm going to miss due to the fact that I am seeing a lot more of the game, and it's meant to happen when even if like a couple of pixels see it. So if something happens and I miss it in the game, it's the fact that the resolution's a lot larger. That's a point that I'm going to mention because a lot of the older games do not account for that, mainly because we couldn't really predict that this would happen so quickly. But in the meantime, we'll talk about gameplay. Fear 1's gameplay was fairly simple. You moved, jumped, punched, kicked, air kicked and slide kicked, and shot guns. A couple of the guns had scopes, and that was cool. Depending on which one you were using, depends on what gun, what the effects were. But a lot of the time, it was a fairly simple run and gun gameplay with a couple of slowdown periods. You had to sometimes hide behind cover because you'd often get into a fight and you'd really low health, and it's like, I don't want to die. Oh, I'm dead. Better replay that little bit because it's old school, and old school was harder. Anyway, now I'm going to talk about the next bit. The slow-mo thing, I think it was one of the first few games to implement this very well and made it interesting in the game. So during those action-packed fights where everything's going too fast, you'd slow it down, and it is explained in the game that the person's reaction time and psychic capabilities are way better than a good percentage of like most military. And that's why there is this. It's one of those times where they've explained it better than they would normally, and that's good. Moving on. In Fear 2, they devolved the gameplay down to its basic elements. You could still hit with your gun. You can still shoot. You can look down the sights now to most guns, even though, to be honest, in a lot of the case, you don't really need to. I didn't do it on most cases because then you become it's a habit to look down the sight while playing shooter games, and that's one developed through playing a lot of modern military games such as Call of Duty and Battlefield. And in Fear, we didn't have that. A lot of the sight looking down was only focused on the two guns that had sights, which was, I think there was another one. I've got a terrible memory, by the way, so forgive me. In the end, they kept the. They did keep on the other hand, they did keep the bullet time. Excuse me, sorry. but in my opinion, they devolved it back to basics when they could have. I really did like the almost kung fu that you could do, because it made the game have a little bit more variety. So I could run, drop kick, dragon kick, whatever you want to go, flying high kick someone in the face, and then gun someone down as I'm falling. And it was great. It felt great. The ragdolls actually reacted great to it. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but sometimes it produced the most hilarious things. And then we move on to Fear 2. Fear 2 devolved it down to the most basics. You look down the sight, you gun, you press buttons, and you can jump. You can hit with your gun as melee, as always, but there was almost no point, because I snuck up behind someone, it did nothing. You can't do the slide kick or the high kick or any like kung fu in the game. I mean, you are playing a different character, and that's fine, but I would expect the gameplay to be much more similar to what the gameplay was now. It was more Call of Duty rather than Fear, and that's not okay. This brings me to an example game, Crisis. The first game had a little bit of complexity to it. You had some management and large areas where you had to think about what you were doing. In the first game, in the third game, they took away most of the selection that you could do. So in the original game, you could punch without using maximum strength mode, but now you have to use maximum strength mode almost all the time. And the sprinting could be done without maximum speed, but apparently you have to force to use it in the third one, so on and so forth. They kind of dumbed it down as the console markets. I am blaming the console markets, because a lot of things are made for consoles first rather than PC, and that is irritating. I mean, real-time strategies are an exception to that, because, in my opinion, they can never work for... they really can't work for consoles. And there are, as far as I'm aware, no exceptions to that rule. I digress. The gameplay itself is basically Call of Duty now. Most of the buttons are still there, barring the martial arts. And I really enjoyed the martial arts, and it kind of killed a little bit for me. But for now, we're going to move on to one of the most important things in an action horror. The horror being very much elevated to this point. Sounds. The most important thing for me in horror is sound. Without sound, you cannot create a decent atmosphere. I mean, visually, you can create an amazing atmosphere, but without the sounds to match or enhance it, it's not going to do as much of an effect any other way. Now, Fear 1 and Fear 2 did suffer a very small similarity of problems when it comes to sound, but Fear 2 kind of didn't fix that at all. In fact, it kind of made it worse. Starting with Fear 1. Fear 1 had this slight issue where a lot of the sounds were on the same volume. So a slamming door, something that would normally kind of freak her out in a quiet moment, was on the same level as gunfire. So I was kind of prepared for a level of noise there. In a game where a lot of action takes place at very medium volumes, if everything else is at a medium volume, it really sucks away the atmosphere. The quiet moments in this game are a lot better than they did in Fear 2, and I'm not going to talk about Fear 3 because they basically... Yeah, that's what happened to the horror aspect in Fear 3. They just went with the horror visually rather than the actual horror atmosphere. So Fear 1 had a fantastic use of sound. While it did suffer some problems, it quite often used they did a lot more, how to put it, variety of the sounds and a lot more controlled sounds. In a quiet room, you can't create a sense of tension unless there is always an impending danger. So let's take an example. Let's do a little thought experiment. You are in a house. You are alone in the house, just doing nothing. Sat down on a chair, maybe reading a book, watching TV. And outside, you have no access to any nearby civilization. You start hearing sounds outside that are unfamiliar to you. Normally, most people would be like, okay, that doesn't sound good. Or people would start panicking. Or people would dismiss it altogether. Now, let's take the idea that you're in the fear universe and you are also being chased by a malevolent, antagonistic psychic. She's not a ghost. She's actually alive. She's a psychic who's also be able to create some horrific visual and disturbing control over other entities, we'll say. That makes it far, far worse. But if it's happening all the time, and the loud sounds are all drowned out by the fact that you're doing everything else, it's nothing. But if you're going down a quiet corridor, and the slow creaking happens, and there are footsteps behind you, just not quite close enough, but you turn around, there's no one there. That's an atmosphere. It's a basic atmosphere, but I wouldn't be able to show this without showing you visually. One of the best examples of this would be the short PT demo. PT Resident Evil demo. Resident Evil? Yeah. Silent Hill or Resident Evil. Silent Hill. Sorry. Silent Hill PT. That demo made a fantastic and utter glorious use of sound. The visuals itself, the lack of sound in a lot of the cases did a lot more than the actual sound itself. And unfortunately, the Fear 1 game did suffer with a little bit of cinematic sound. But Fear 2 made it worse. So let's start on talking about that. Fear 2 suffers from cinematic issues. It's trying to be more of a film than it is trying to be a game. And unfortunately, when you're playing a game, you don't sit there and just watch it unless you're watching a cutscene or you're watching someone else play. So where's the watching in that? It's an interactive media. So where's the sound problem in this? The sound problem is found when you are walking down a corridor and everything is at the same level of volume. Your footsteps are semi-loud. Yeah, gunfire is semi-loud. Everything is, in a scale of 1 to 10, if everything's at a 5 and a 6, there's nothing to make you feel. There's nothing to make you on edge. The tension is gone because it's focusing on the visual aspect without backing it up with the sound to bring it all in. In a lot of the I actually changed the volumes on this to make, and with all the I can't get the words out. I'm that irritated by it, and it's annoying. So basically, I messed around with the volume of the game, messed around with the volume on my headset, and I found that I couldn't make the game more atmospheric because the sounds in the game were all on the same volume level. You went down a demon, you heard a chittering, it was at the same volume level of your footsteps, which were loud. Oh, a demon's attacking? Oh, it's at the same volume as your gunfire. Oh, there's a creak? Well, you already can't hear anything because your footsteps are taking over and you've got someone talking to you 90% of the time. That takes away from the alone feeling. A good horror game doesn't make you feel like someone's there. This is like the classic Dead Space 3 problem. The first two were scary because you were alone. I mean, there were other characters in the game, but you were alone almost 100% of the time, meaning that there was no one there to help you, and you were on your own, and you could not do anything about that. The third one gave you co-op. So scary. Oh yeah, the third one was an action game as well. It wasn't even a scary game anymore. It was just, oh, look at these monsters. Shoot them in the face. Oh, all the ammo's the same. Shoot them in the face. When Alma appeared, there was this high-pitched noise and this noise, but it was never intense enough to unnerve me or pull me in. It was never... The game, it threw me out. It threw me out, the immersion. And I know this is an older game and I've played it before, so I know a lot of what's going on. But even then, I should be able to, like, get myself drawn into it with no issues. A good game draws you in no matter how it looks, sounds, and feels. I mean, Silent Hill 2. The game is an old PS2 game and is one of the oldest games that I own currently because all of my older games got thrown out and I've been collecting PS2 games again because I still have my PS2. Anyway, that has a better atmosphere than some of today's horror games. Taking a more modern approach, Resident Evil 7, these two companies seem to be coming up a lot in this horror vibe. Resident Evil 7 was a fantastic use of visual sound and visuals and sound, I should say. I always felt scared. I always felt on tense, but never enough to throw me out of the immersion. Even though I was doing it on YouTube and it is on my channel, you can check it out if you look it up on... I think there's a playlist, so check it out. And it is finished, so don't worry. I didn't play the DLC though, so sorry. But in a good horror game, film, sound is more important than anything else. And I believe that is the main reason why Fear 2 is now terrible. Because now I'm looking at a critical, mainly because when I played the game, I was, how old was I? I think I was, came out in 2009. I'm 27 in 2018. The game's just 9 years old. We had better games back then that did the job. In fact, I will find one in 2009 and play it. Even Condemned, which was technically not a horror game, it was a scary thriller. That was scarier. I'm getting angry. All in all, I'd believe that Fear 2 is a worse game than Fear 1. It does have some funny moments. It does have a couple of jump scares. But all in all, I don't believe it's a true Fear game, even if it is the correct IP, the correct atmosphere. It ruined itself by being uneventful because it was all the same stuff without trying to scare me. And in the first game, they focused a lot more on the horror aspect. In the second game, they focused moderately more on the action aspect. In the third game, it was 100% action with horror visuals. And that is my case. You are welcome to debate me down in the comments below if you have any games that you want me to review or just play or lose my mind over or live stream. Let me know down in the comments below. I've really enjoyed discussing this. It was one of the hardest ones for me to discuss because I've had to reset this 150 odd times. Not probably that number, but you know what I mean. So I'll see you next time. I will probably have a much happier video to show you. And it's probably after Christmas that I will show this, so sometime in January. Not this one, but more videos. See you then. Bye-bye.